think we just fixed that the video output. Anyways, so why are we here to discuss about Drupal multisites? So we probably all know how to build one Drupal site. Can we just repeat what we have done and build multiple? Well, those sites are actually multiple independent sites. So we're talking about more like related sites. I'm going to give some real life examples. Case number 1. I want to set up one main site and four sub-sites. Each has its own domain. The client has asked to have users that can edit all the sites from one CMS front end and does not want to keep logging into separate Drupal sites. Also, the sites need to share some content between each other. Case number 2. We launched the first site successfully. There are several more in the pipeline. They will share some customer modules and features, but will have different themes and content structure. Case number 3. I'm working on a website for National ABC organization. The national site would be www.abc.com. There are 12 different state sites, for example. The Florida site would be fl.abc.com. I like the idea of 12 different sites because it resolves security issues, and I can only rig one site at a time. However, the mere thought of having to maintain the software on 12 sites is causing me to have nightmares. So those are the things that causing us asking lots of questions. For example, are they going to be hosted on the same server? Do we want a different user access and control, or shared user access and control between those sites? What about theme? Do we want to have the same theme or similar themes? How about shared content? Sometimes people want to share contents between sites. What about maintenance? If I have 12 sites, how do I do the maintenance? And finally, what kind of development environment do you have? Do you have dev, stage, and prod? How do I manage that? So all of these questions need answers. Fortunately, in Drupal there are many approaches to address those questions. So we know Drupal has 3 elements: code base, database, and files. So it depends how those sites share those elements. We categorize them into 3 infrastructures. So the first one we're going to talk about is multiple sites. This is a situation we just talked about. The approach we just mentioned. Basically, all the sites have separate code base, database, and files. So they are basically completely separate sites. Each of them have full autonomy. And if you want to share some of the, for example, you want to have some consistency between sites, you can use tools such as installation profiles, Drush, Agar to create sites for consistency. If you want to share content, you can use tools, you can use modules like feed, services, and migrate to transfer data between sites. You can also set up single sign-on for user access across the sites, so your user don't have to have separate accounts on every site. Well, the advantage of this is that the more autonomy you have less potential security risk because they are isolated to one site. well, the disadvantage, besides you have to develop all this process or tools or services to share contents or user access, you also have to deal with the maintenance. And as the number of your site grows, the workload grows as well. So the next infrastructure is called single site with restricted access. With this approach, you have appearance of multiple sites, but like for example, you can have different themes, you can have different domains, but you share the database and you share the files and code base. It is actually, they are actually virtual multiple sites. So, though we can use modules such as organic groups, domain access, or virtual sites to achieve that. The first one is organic modules. It provides sectional editorial access control, permission management. We can use organic groups for example, if you have a main site, you have lots of subsites with very similar structures or themes. If you want more multiple site features, you can use domain access module, which will allow you to have different domains, different themes, sometimes different user controls. Well, the advantage of single site infrastructure is that you have one central management of users, code, and a database. That saves a lot. That's time saving as to the administration or site maintenance. It's also much easier to share content and have single user access across sites. And you also can have many combinations. For example, I can have same theme but different user controls, or I can have different themes but share content types. However, there are serious drawbacks to consider when you choose single site. First, setup modules such as domain access is complex. It requires knowledge of advanced Drupal concept and understanding of how DNS works. And also sometimes you may encounter module conflict. Third, it is nice that modules such as domain access can provide the multi-site features, but is domain access, module like a domain access, really a workaround instead of work with the Drupal core. And things can get a little bit complicated when you have a large, demanding project. And because everything is on the same site, so problem on one side may impact other sites. And same goes with the security. So you may ask, when do I use single site approach? So there's no clear-cut answers. But in general, if you have affiliate sites that are relatively small and are all very familiar, it may work very well for you. However, if you have a large number of big sites that are all very different, this is really not recommended. Another factor to concern is, are you comfortable with the technical complexity involved, particularly with the domain access? Now, let's talk about the third infrastructure, the Drupal multisite feature. This is actually what I chose for our projects after evaluating all the options. So what is Drupal multisite? This is the official definition from Drupal.org. Drupal has a feature which allows separate independent sites to be served from a single code base. Each site has its own database, configuration, files, and base domain or URL. So we can see Drupal multisite is not a workaround. It is actually a feature supported by Drupal that allows separate sites to be served from a single code base. So let's take a look at the architecture of Drupal multisites. So we have 4 sites as an example, and each site has its own database and files, and all of them share the same code base. So the code base meaning core, modules, and themes. So what it means? So a single code base meaning a single installation. You don't have to install your site over and over again. And sometimes, let's say you have all the sites in place and you develop one module for one site, it can be shared to another site very easily. Separate database. So this is similar to multi-sites approach. The database are separated, so they're secure, but you can't share content. All the contents are separated. Every site has its own configurations and user profiles, stuff like that. And at the same time, you can have different modules enabled or themes enabled. Each site has its own site folders. Separate files means I can have my own modules or my themes in my own site for my own site if I want. So there's some flexibility. We can share themes, but we can also have our own themes. And the Drupal multisite, even though the database is not shared, but there's some configuration you can do so that you can share users, profile, and session tables. So why did we choose Drupal site? So in our situation, we have one main site, www.nih, and we have a list of other sites. Each site has different content, different themes, different domains, and different editors. However, because we are a small team, we want to keep up some of the good stuff we did for the first site and reuse that for the other sites. We also have limited resource. All the sites are hosted on the same server. So by choosing Drupal multisite, it saves time for our installation and maintenance down the road. Time saving in development. Almost no complication when site grows, because we're talking about the features supported by Drupal instead of a workaround. It also works seamlessly in the dev stage and prod environment. If one site is down, it's unlikely to bring down others because we have separate database. Of course, there's always a downside for each approach. The content is not shared because all the contents are in separate. The contents of each site is in different database. Same for content types, views, and configurations. Well, we have the advantage of saving time for maintenance, but in the same times, every time when we do core update, that happens to all sites at the same time. Okay, so enough talk. I want to show you how we did that in our backend. So we use Acuqia as our backend cloud hosting service. I'm going to show you a video. This part is mostly I recorded before the presentation. It shows on the backend, and I will talk more about how we did it on files and configurations for multi-site setup. Now we're at the back end of our remote server. As you can see, we have set up 5 domains. Let's look at the database. There are 4 existing databases, each corresponding to a site. Now we're going to install the 5th one. Let's create the database for the new site. After we created the new database, we must also create or modify the configuration files. Otherwise, you're going to see a page like this when you're trying to run install.php. Let's go back to our new databases. Let's copy the PHP code that needs to be added to the configuration file. Now we have set up all the directories and files needed for multi-site. Let's run this install.php one more time. Voila! We're done. Well, it looks simple, right? So we spent some time to figure that out. I hope you. Sorry. All right, just recap what we did. Hopefully that will save you some time to figure it out. First, you need to have the domain in place on your host server. Well, the next is what I just showed you on the remote server. Create a new database for the site, because in our situation, we have the first site in place already, and when you use Drupal Multisite, we share the same code base, so you don't really have to install the code. All you need to do is just recreate a new database. The next thing is set up configuration files. This is when you tell Drupal, say, I have a new site. Here's the database. Here's the domain. Please, make it work. So we're talking about 2 files: settings, sites.php, and settings.php. Now, of course, you need to create the site directory so that Drupal can save all its site-specific sites and stuff in that directory for the new site. And then you go back to remote and you run install. And that's it. Right? So this is a screenshot of our folders in the backend. So you can see this is we have the Drupal core, and we also have the modules and themes that's shared by all the sites. And this is the default site. And this is the size, the multi-sites. For example, this one we just added. Let's look at the settings.php. Settings.php is a site-specific configuration file. So you have this file for every site. If you don't, then you will go back. Drupal will go back to default.settings.php, looking for the configuration information. And what we did in our video is that we copied the database settings and saved into this file. The next one is size.php. This configuration file is really basically telling Drupal to connect the domain to the site folders. It is located in the site directory. Oops. And it defines the alias that maps host names, ports, and path names to the configuration directory in the sites directory. We can also do that for the dev, staging, and local and prod environments. So this is the rsites.php. If you look at that and you see this, the case dev is for our dev site, and the test is really for the stage and prod. So you got that idea. All right. So we're done with our multiple Drupal multi-site setup. I want to briefly also show you what we did with search in a multi-site environment. So we use Apache Solr search in our Drupal multi-site environment. And we use a single instance multi-core. Each site has its own index, including the sites on the dev, stage, and prod. Sometimes people choose to use shared index. If you decided to go with the shared index, you can use multi-site search module to manage multi-site search. All right, so we have covered a lot today. I want to summarize what we have talked about. So when you design multi-site as an architect, the first thing you want to consider is requirements. And the other factors are performance and security. Of course, you also need to think about how demanding each approach is as to the technical complexity and how much effort you need to put in for administration, maintenance, whether you have a lot of sites or you have a couple of sites, you need to put that into consideration. These are the resources that may be helpful if you want to do some research yourself. And that's it. So any questions, we'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, I've always wondered this. I work for Social Security and I do multi-sites for in-house, but for contractors, I'm not sure if you could speak to this or maybe somebody else can. If you're an independent contractor and you're making a bunch of sites for a bunch of different clients, would it make sense for you just to have a multi-site set up that you deploy a new version of that site to all your clients?
In your situation, if those clients are completely unrelated,
right,
but you are maintaining the hosting and all of that, and you want to save some time, you may use Drupal Multisite.
Okay.
So all you have to, so you have very relatively independent sites, but in the same time, it saves you a lot, work as to maintenance or development.
Makes sense.
Is there much difference between multi-site versus 7 and 8?
There are not much differences. In our platform is Drupal 7, and there are slight. I think, for example, the sharing table, user tables, and profiles and sessions tables. Those are actually gradually fading away. They're still supported that in Drupal 8, but probably not going to support in Drupal 9. I know that, but I can't say too much about Drupal 8 because we're not on the Drupal 8 platform, but I know it's still supported.
Just like a scenario, what if, how does module dependency work in your sub-site setup? Like, let's say you have a sub-site that required a module, or a later version of a module that you have in your core. But that module, of course, then will be in the sub-site, and if you needed to run updates to your core site, or your core contrib modules, how do you manage that dependency? What kind of rules do you have in place to ensure that? Like it test states, like fieldable panel panes, for example. Let's say one of your sub-sites needed to use that, but it was the release version was broken, but the dev version is not. So they install the dev version on their multi-site, on their sub-site. How do you what do you tell your sub-site maintainer? with regards to that module? Like, how do you manage fractures or with the different versions of the modules you have between your core contrib library and your subsite modules?
Okay, I'm not sure I completely understood your questions, but I'm trying to answer it.
Sure.
Okay, that's some of the concerns. First of all, it does allow you to have individual modules for individual
Yes.
site. So if, let's say, there's some modules you really feel like have completely different versions, I'm using version development, the other one using release, and you may want to put that in the site directory so that won't impact on others. And sometimes, let's say some sites don't even use that module. I mean, you disable that module, that won't have much impact on other sites. And I also know some people are doing very complicated work that, for example, using version controls, and it also depends on your hosting environment. Because if you're using version controls, you can have this site using this version, another site using another version. You're basically talking about completely different code base.
And I guess a follow-up question is like, how do you, as a maintainer of this multi, how do you keep track of that? You know, eventually you're going to have everybody just running installing their own modules, setting up their own patches, and then when you need to make security updates, you know, that might potentially break things down the line. So do you guys have strict enforcement or rules on what modules that subsite maintainers need to use, or do you lock that functionality down?
Yeah, I see that's more like a management issue,
Yeah,
not
that's
really a
right.
technical issue. For us, we don't have it because we have a very small team.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have, but I can imagine you probably need some kind of way of managing that, trying to avoid some other, like some people doing that and impact on other people. But you know, you have one code base to manage. You're not supposed to have multiple people manage the same code base.
Yeah.
So you basically have to dedicate one person.
Gotcha.
I think Scott wants to have some announcement.
Are there any more questions for Flora? This is
Probably not record this because